Of new Pulp Fiction. And we have our moderator over there, Eckert 27, Ron Fortier, two-time Pulp Factory Award winner. And these, right now, four gentlemen, they will gaze into their crystal balls to chart the road ahead with a new and exciting continuation of the pulp genre known as New Pulp. That sounds like it came right out of a pulp magazine. We have you, Jim. All right, we got Jim Beard and Rick Lay, and this must be Frank Schildiner and Scott Eckert. And Art Sippo hopefully will show up. But Jim is from Toledo. Sold the story to DC Comics in 2002 and has since written for Star Wars, Ghostbusters. And he is the author of Sergeant, is it Janus? Janus, Spirit Breaker, and Captain Action, Riddle of the Glowing Men. Over here, I did this alphabetically. Wynn is the author with Philip Jose Farmer of The Evil in Pemberley House, and the sequel to that book, The Scarlet Jaguar, premiered this yesterday here at the show. He's co-edited 3 Green Hornet books for Moonstone, and has written many stories about a variety of characters: Avengers, Zorro, Honey West, Scarlet Pimpernel, and many others. Rick, over here, computer programmer, best known for his articles based on the Wohl-Newton concepts of Phil Farmer, and which were collected in 4 volumes by Altus Press. He's also appeared a lot in Tales of the Shadowman from Black Coat Press, and Wildcat released his Shadows of the Opera, a novel about a 19th century female vigilante. Mr. Frank, you don't want to mess with him. A martial arts instructor from Jersey, has written Black Bat, Ravenwood, Secret Agent X stories for Airship, Avengers for Moonstone, Thunder Jim, Richard Knight for Prose Production, and is also a Tales of the Shadowman author. And we still don't have art, so we'll skip art. Okay? All right. Are the tickets almost ready? Okay. As we have for the entire show, we have 3 more copies of Captain Hawkman and the Skyhook Pirates, written by Charles F. Milhouse and published by Stormgate Publishing. They were kind enough to donate about, 10 or 12 of these to us. It's pulpy and kind of movie serial kind of inspired fiction. And as soon as this winning woman finishes with these, but she's won, 2 prizes, and her husband would have won a 3rd, but they're going to share it. Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll tape the bottom for the other 2 drawings. You good there? All right, Frank, want to do the honors?
846-319.
There we go. You got one already.
Try again.
846-298. It's me.
I never wanted anything in my entire life.
And, that's what Pulpest
Fix this in. Oh.
All right. So it's all yours, guys. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
Two o'clock is Roger Price reading from Skull Island.
We will be gone.
All right.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Mike.
You're welcome.
All right. I am not going to need the mic. I guarantee you can hear me. Okay? done this is the third year in a row I'm moderating this panel. I've had a ball doing it in the past. And what we're going to do is we're going to make it a continuation of those last 2 years. What we did the last 2 years is pretty much discuss what new pulp is. And we did that for 2 years, and we pretty much covered the theme around the clock as to how it was born, how it came out of the old pulps, the concept of the revival, what's going on, the reprint books. And ultimately, maybe about 10 years ago, the ballpark, new publishers started coming into the business and hiring writers and artists to do new pulp. It's here. It's a part of the pulp community today. It's a vibrant part of the pulp community, and its goal remains to keep pulpdom alive. All right? But where are we going with that? All right? Before we get into the main topic, I thought it'd be interesting to ask our panelists one at a time, just to give us a little bit of background as to how each of them discovered new pulp. Was it intentional, or did they one day wake up and realize, I'm writing this stuff, what is it? And their fans turned around and said, oh, you're writing new pulp. So, Jim, how did you come to new pulp?
Through you, actually. I got onto Facebook, and I don't remember who it was. Some friend of mine was like a friend of yours, and he said, "Oh my God, he wrote Green Hornet. That's like one of my most favorite comic series of all time, the now comic series, but that." And I, sent him a friend request, and then I asked him because I started to look into what he was doing now, and I saw that you can't hear me.
Oh my God, my wife would be shocked. Sorry to hear that. Sorry. Should I repeat all of that?
Stop with me. No.
Okay. No. I met Ron on Facebook, and I looked into what he was doing, and I saw that he had Airship 27. And what they were doing, and I was really fascinated by it. I really, really wanted to write fiction. I had written comics before that. I really wanted to write fiction, but I found that I wasn't good at what we considered conventional fiction. And I asked him if there was opportunities in writing pulp, and he said yes. And he said, do up a 2-page sample to see if you can actually, write this. And I did. I did a Doc Savage thing, and he said, you got it. That, you can write pulp, and something exploded in my brain. It's like, this is what I want to do. This is what I can do, and hopefully I can do it well. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Rick.
Okay, I got involved. First, I was writing articles for the fan magazine going way back to the 80s. And I really wasn't going to think I would ever do fiction. I thought, I might come up with some interesting theory that somebody might later turn into a novel, just like maybe we can do Sherlock Holmes messages. You're usually going to find, like Philip Jose Palmer based this on H.W. Starr, wrote some article about Captain Nemo and Professor Moriarty. That's the logical spot. I figured, I'll write some articles and maybe somebody with better literary talent than me will later turn it into a book. Well, that wasn't exactly happening, but then I came up with one idea, which was sort of about the Phantom of the Opera being connected to the Shadow, which I kind of liked, and I said, someday I'll write something about that. And I was just waiting for the right moment, and then John Mark Pulpest at Black Coat Press, and we were corresponding together as part of a Yahoo group, and he said, I'm coming out with this collection called Tales of the Shadowmen. Here's what to do. If you have a Shadow story that you wanted to write, turn it into a Unix story. If you have a Doc Savage story, turn it into a Dark Art story. He's mashing up all the French characters into American analog. And I didn't feel I was ready yet to do the Shadow Phantom of the Opera story. So I said, I'll do something set in the same universe. It's kind of clunky if you read it. It was called The Last Vendetta, and there's too much going on in the story. Or at least I started to write, and then got to see what I'm doing wrong and what I'm doing right and whatever. And then eventually I got a book collection of short stories from Wildcat Books, and the sequels ended up being published by Black Coat Press, one coming out in like 2 days. So that's how I broke into writing.
The thing I absolutely love about Rick's story and Rick's background is I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Rick, but Rick has such a, an extensive background in pulp and is very knowledgeable about it. One of the things I appreciate about the new pulp movement as it is was that he could take that knowledge finally and have an outlet for it. As newer publishers came into the business, he's given that opportunity to start creating some amazing pieces. Now let me add, Jim had mentioned the fact that, when we hooked up and we started talking about Jim writing for us, I usually ask new writers who come to us to give me a 2-page sample of their writing. And all I ask them to do, and it's because this is the way I understand pulp, is basically give me 2 pages, all right, single space, of all-out, balls-out action. I do not want angst. I do not want characterization. I do not want motivation. I want action. Give me 2. If you can write 2 pages of nonstop action, then, brother, you can write pulp. And you know what? Everybody can't do that. I have some very good friends, colleague writers, who are published, well-established, who cannot write pulp. It takes a special mindset to do that. Now, I want to shift gears because we've got a real balanced panel here, and I appreciate that a great deal. Frank and Jim are pretty much newbies up here. Rick and Win have a little bit more background. So, Win, why don't you take over? How did you come to what we know as new pulp?
What Rick said.
And that's the brevity of pulp. There you go. Some of your background, please.
Sure. So I've always been a really big fan of Philip Jose Farmer's World Movie concept, which brought together all of the pulp heroes, or many of the pulp heroes, into sort of a shared continuity. I had started a website in which I was also documenting a lot of crossovers which existed in fiction, including Ron's own Green Hornet series, Sting of the Green Hornet, in which he also threw in cameos. Copyright, no copyright violation, just sort of cameos, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, of the Golden Age. Clark Kent and Lois Lane, they're on a train. Golden Age Captain America. And so that was what I was doing. I was working on the Wool Newton website with Farmer's concept and expanding it via crossovers. So I think, well, now the Green Hornet is in this shared continuity, right, through all these links. At the same time, I was also writing these nonfiction essays, much like Rick's essays that had been in fanzines in prior decades, but publishing them online on my website. And happened to go to my first San Diego Comic-Con in 2005. I had already been part of a Yahoo group with Jean-Marc Lapierre, who Rick just mentioned. Jean-Marc was also working in this area, French Wold Newton, his own little niche. And happened to meet Jean-Marc in person at San Diego Comic-Con 2005. He said, "I'm doing an anthology fiction. Do you want to write fiction?" I was like, try. I'll give it a shot. And I think probably much like Rick, if I go back and look at my first effort for Tales of the Shadowman Volume 1, I would probably want to heavily revise it at this point, and bring it up to snuff. But Jean-Marc gave me my crack at it. That's how I got into it, and then was very fortunate to be able to go back to my roots with Philip Jose Farmer, work with Phil, and complete one of his novels, and then get in with Moonstone and work with some of our licensed properties. It's been a nice journey.
Yeah. Okay, so Frank, you're, again, like Jim, relatively new.
Yeah, well, that's Wynn's role. I actually met Wynn first through his website, and he introduced me to the Yahoo group, which had Jean-Marc and Rick, who I've known now almost a decade. And Jean-Marc one day announced to the group he was putting together a French book by a author named Jimmy Joel, who had tons and tons of pulp kind of stories. Would anybody like to write it? And I'd always been an aspiring writer, but unsuccessful. I said, sure, I'll take a crack at it. And I wrote this story called the character named Gene Caravan, who was a Indiana Jones type who looked like Clark Gable, who dealt with ancient instruments. Weird mix, but he's French. And I wrote it, he liked it, he said, I'm going to publish it, and if you make one crossover with an American character, I'll put it in Tales of the Shadow. So I changed the name of the inspector to Inspector Kramer from the New York Wolf Stories, and I became a pulp writer in a sense. Then, maybe a month after that book came out, I wrote Ron just to check on his health for the past. He had mentioned something about it, and he hadn't mentioned it once, just to see how he was. And we started chatting online through email for about 3 straight hours. We're sending emails back and forth, and I became comfortable. That's really where it came from. And since then, it just expanded exponentially.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. Okay. So, I mean, again, because of the balanced panel, what you're seeing here is a couple of real veterans who've been a part of fandom for so long, and a couple of fresh writers who are coming into, this market, this thing we call new pulp, that's really been exploding in at least the last 5 years, more so than ever. I'm part of a Yahoo group called the Pulp Factory, and we've been around for just about 7 years now. And about 5 years ago, we had this idea of creating an award for people getting involved in new pulps, because we wanted to keep the ball going. And we figured if we came up with an award kind of thing, that would help inspire it and encourage other new writers and artists to get into the field. Give us some publicity for what new pulp is. Now, I mention all this because the first year we did the awards, which we give out now annually at Windy City, the first Friday night at Windy City, all the nominations and everything for the awards came from, I believe at that time, 7 publishers. Now, 5 years ago, we had 7 publishers who were basically recognized as wanting and publishing new fiction material that we could label new pulp. Well, here we are. This year, we gave out the Pulp Factory Awards for the 4th year in a row, and I think that number now that we called the nominations from was 20 publishers. 20! I mean, the big guys in New York are doing new pulp. All right? We have more and more publishers coming into the field. I mean, Tommy Hancock of Pro Se Productions a few years ago, because this label was being affixed to this movement, came up with a little logo called New Pulp, which all of us are sharing now, and proud to identify ourselves as such. Okay, here we go. 5 here, 4 years later, 20 publishers. And my question to the panel, and the topic that we need to discuss, is twofold. Number one, where do you think new pulp is going? All right? Number two, what's the potential of it, and how is it tied to a very, very niche market? Because can we grow new pulp without growing all of you? If our market stays limited to what is the new pulp community today, aren't we going to run into a wall eventually? As more and more publishers come in, doesn't this pie get smaller and smaller? And does it behoove us to find a way to increase your participation and get more people out in these seats and as our readers? So, Win, why don't you take that?
So initially, I would say that, as you mentioned, some of the larger publishers now are getting into this. I don't know that they know that they're getting into it, right?
Right.
I mean, we are conscious sort of what we're doing, and I think that they're looking at it from a different perspective. And so my question would be, and I don't necessarily have the answer, but how do you marry those two things up? Like, how do we tap that market, right?
Right.
So these guys are putting out, I think there's like a series or a book called Ghosts of Manhattan, and it's about a vigilante, and it's very much new pulp. It might be slightly alternate universe, but that's mass market, right? And they're aiming that at everybody, not just the people that we can reach with our limited marketing potential. So how do we marry that up? I would say that's the direction of new pulp. Not necessarily how do we, the 4 of us or anybody writing new pulp, get in with big New York publishers. It's not where I'm going with it. But how do we realize that market potential and create that awareness among that readership that there's a wealth of other material that's very similar that could be appealing?
Right.
How do we break that wide open? I think that's where I see things going. Kind of like the steampunk movement was, 10, 15 years ago.
Right. I think a lot of it has to do with marketing and promotion, all right? And one of the things I was talking about was that, I mean, we've got the Pulp Factory Awards, Tommy got rolling with the Pro Se Awards, the Pulp Art Awards that he does at his convention. And obviously, the Muncie Awards were in place as well. And I think awards do expand as far as getting public out there and having people go, what's this award? What's it about? What's the community behind it? All right? That is a challenge for us. I think it's a huge challenge. The writer you're talking about, by the way, is George Mann.
Yeah.
And he's a straight, out there writer for some of the bigger publishing companies. But the thing is, we're also educating the writers out there that they are a part of the movement, whether they're aware of it or not. Because Mann's novel, as Ghost of Manhattan, was one of the nominees for some of these awards. And ultimately, he became aware of that, all right? So that's one of the things we have to do. We definitely have to educate the literary community, especially in New York, on this movement, and that they are inadvertently becoming a part of it. Now, Frank, just a question, because I want to stick to both themes. And the challenge thing is going to be one that, it's pressing and it's there. But let's go back to that original question of where do you see New Pulp being in, say, 5 years from now?
Well, I think that Pulp, in a sense, really never went away. If you think about the 60s and 70s, Pinnacle Publishing produced an entire line of adventure pulp, just putting it under other names, but sometimes they directly stole from the source. The Death Merchant used to make regular mentions of the Shadow and things like that. In a sense, if New Pulp is going to survive, it has to understand, the writers and the creators have to understand that the strict 1930s, 40s kind of concept is not always going to fly in all senses, but the larger picture is for everybody else. Clive Cussler, that's pure pulp. Like it, but it is. I just don't like the writer person. The H.M. Pendergrass books are some of the best stuff out there. I could stand here and name tons of them, but we want to keep going. But if you think about it, the true concept of pulp, at least the hero pulp, comes from a very positive, heroic nature of the character. And I think maybe the years of these negative characters in the movies and in that, the cynical, world-weary, negative stuff.
Explaining with days of the anti-hero.
Right, the days of the anti-hero they're always going to be here. The Wolverines of the comic world will always be here, but I think to a degree people are starting to say, I need more. I can't always live in this horrible Blade Runner kind of universe. I need to live in a positive place, and that's where we're getting.
Okay, good, excellent. Rick, if you want to please pick up that thread. Is New Pulp addressing that, as Rick says, and I love that concept, Frank. So here's the thing. Is New Pulp giving us the heroes that today's society wants again? Is demanding again? Is a look back to see no longer, because the word anti-hero drives me crazy, okay? Life is about language, all right? And when you come up with a word that says anti-hero, it's villain. Okay? Why does it get complicated? You have a hero, you have a villain. I mean, what do we have? An anti-villain? All right? I mean, that's, why not that? All right? So, New Pulp is very much, at least entrenched, in giving us back old-fashioned heroes. Is that part of the remedy of it growing?
Well, it kind of depends, from the perspective of certain people, what is an old-fashioned hero? I mean, it might be you think John Wayne as opposed to Clint Eastwood. But if you look at, let's say Richard Wentworth is a spy. This is watching one of his old series. Was he really ingrained in the American confidence? Reading a spider novel could be a very depressing event. If you've ever read the original, if you get all of New York being destroyed in 1 second, and he's you have a man who you had like two sorts of heroes in Pulp Fiction. These dark heroes who use whatever means necessary to beat the bad guys. Then you had kind of the noble man who has a certain set of values, Doc Savage, the Avenger, or whatever. That's more of a traditional hero. But I think the original pulp heroes like the Shadow and the Spider, to some degree the Blue Man, they're not really traditional. I mean, I wouldn't say they're anti-heroes, and they're not cynical like The Man With No Name by Clint Eastwood. But you know, it's sort of the old Batman versus. It later became Batman versus Superman.
Right, right.
It's the guy who works outside the system, who's almost a criminal, but he's doing it for the right reasons.
Right, but you know, but the connecting thread between them, though, that they were clearly heroes. I mean, even if you got some vicarious thrill reading The Spider and half of New York is blown up in every single issue, there was a realization that the Spider defeated the bad guys at the end. There was never an ending with the Spider lost.
Right, he is the savior of the city.
Right. So I mean, there's a thing with post-pulp work, post-World War II literature, where good guys do lose at the end in some stories. Okay, and that's where that shift comes from, and it stays with us from post-World War II. So that we get into angst-ridden heroes like Clint Eastwood. All right, where they're okay. Well, we don't want real heroes anymore because they actually show us our own faults. They become these iconic things on a pedestal that we can't ever reach. So by all means, let's pull them down to our level. All right? I see Pulp as no matter how dark the hero was still the hero. And always trying. Okay? Regardless of that milieu or setting, whether he was the Shadow or Dark Savage, by the end of the book, the hero had triumphed. Villainy had been done away with. So again, that's why I see a lot of eye-opening among young readers coming to New Pulp. Because again, we're not being cynical. We can write explosive action adventure, but there's no gimmick behind it. There's no, tongue-in-cheek and trying to wink at somebody. We're telling you this is a hero. Now, again, follow that through. I mean, this is what you're writing, Jim. You wrote Captain Action, a toy figure from the 60s, who you made into a pulp hero. Was that part of your thinking when you evolved him from the comic books were you aware of that fact that as a pulp hero, he has to have that noble?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, as you just said, that's part of, what pulp is. I think everything is cyclical. It's going to take one or two works to get people interested in exploring what was a hero, what still is, but this past thing. And sometimes we can't even predict what those things will be that will set people off. But I know if people are like myself, if I see something of interest, I start going and finding out about it. I think Pulp needs to promote this a sense of history. I think that's important. How many times you said the word educate, and that's all part of it too. How much we need to educate it, and I'm so glad Wynn kept saying about even the writers, they may not know what they're actually writing. That I agree with you about Clyde Cussler, though. He's absolutely a pulp writer, but yeah, I can't get into it for some reason. But I think if people were Art, why are you sitting out there? Come on up.
I just showed up.
If people were aware of that, I think those connective points can be made, and then these light bulbs are going to go off over everybody's head. But it's going to take one or two events in publishing to really spark people. But, and I don't want to be too cynical about this, over my lifetime I've seen so many things that I've loved expand and then sort of get ruined in a way. I don't know if this is the best example, but Dungeons and Dragons. When I first started playing Dungeons and Dragons, it was this kind of underground subversive type of thing, and it was really cool. I mean, it was popular, and obviously they were selling a lot of this stuff. And then it started to get more homogenized, and it got bigger and bigger to the point where maybe some of us people who originally did it didn't even want to be associated with it anymore. And I think that there might be a danger with that. In Pulp, I hope that we can move forward, but retain the past of the history. And I don't mean to say that we need to keep just writing things that are set in the 30s and 40s, with detectives and things like that. And I love all that, and I want to keep doing that too. But finding new avenues to take those pulp sensibilities and keep going forward with it. But to be careful that it doesn't get so commercialized and homogenized that we lose the wonderful, glorious things that we love about pulp.
Well, that's really the defense strategy that has to go on, and the awareness of that with what new pulp is. I mean, it doesn't take any of us, to be Sherlock Holmes to see in the last decade that pulp fandom itself was becoming way too inclusive. And, the old pulp con and whatever, and there was this feeling of that protectiveness of this is ours, you can't share it. And when new pulp publishers, writers, and artists started to break into that community, there was a sense of well, new kids on the block, what are you doing here? Are you here to help us or to hurt us? Well, I'd like to believe, like in the last 6-7 years, new pulp has become a part of the community, a positive part of the community, and is helping. But Jim makes a really, really valid point about having a respect for the fandom and its roots and understanding those. If new pulp is to stay positive and be an influence that strengthens the pulp community, then we have to be careful where we go with it and not go that far afield, all right, so that it becomes something else other than what we consider pulp and what we love as pulp. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to put all of you on the spot, all right, real quick. Think about it for a second. I want you each to give me a plane. Okay, we talked about 5 years from now, new pulp is still around. What does new pulp have to do? You posted this, Jim, so I'll start back and you're able to win. What would you like to see happen in new pulp in the next 5 years that keeps it alive, all right, but at the same time, again, somehow or other, keeps bringing in new people to the fandom we all love?
That's a great question. I think I just want to really resoundingly applaud all of your comments about maintaining the sensibilities and the themes that are inherent in the prior pulps as we write new pulp. But I think to grow, that new pulp also needs to become, and I think we're already seeing this happening, it needs to become more reflective of society as it is today. So I think that the original pulps were very much a reflection of society in the era from which it sprung forth, or at least how some people saw society at that point in time. I would love to see more female new pulp heroes, more African American pulp heroes, Arab American pulp heroes. Anybody can be a hero, right? And so I would like to see a lot more diversity in terms of the characters that we're depicting, and I think that we could be doing ourselves a disservice by not being that inclusive. So that's the direction I kind of like to see, to bring more people in.
Well done. Okay, Frank.
Well, I agree 100% with Wynn. Charles Saunders in the 80s taught me that lesson, really, with Sword and Sorcery. When he produced the Amaro books, I was given it by a friend who said, "You've got to read this. It's amazing. Don't even look at the cover. Just read." Because he didn't want me to have, I love Conan. He wanted me to take my mental sensibilities about Sword and Sorcery out of the picture and just read. And I ended up reading one of the best Sword and Sorcery books I've ever read in my life. For pulp to survive, it has to grow with the world, as Wynn was saying. You have to be willing to take it beyond the guy in the fedora and the cape and try the new things. And writers are trying to do that, but you also have to understand your market when you're doing it. If you're always writing the hero pulp, for example, you're never really going to get past that. So you got to try expanding into new areas. Pulp doesn't have to necessarily be the Doc Savage clone, the Shadow clone, all of that. It has to be bigger. It has to be a bigger, more inclusive area. We just got to keep trying and seeing what that formula is without losing the past.
Right. One of the things I definitely want to point out that we're talking about, people like Charles Saunders, and then later our mutual good friend Derek Ferguson, have really stepped up to that plate. And Derek, through an association with a gentleman from Atlanta, I believe, Milton Davis, have started what they call Sword and Soul. And Milton's, MV Publications is now doing basically African American pulp. And it's phenomenal. If some of you are not familiar with these books, please go online and check them out. And this was something that pulp needed desperately. All right, it's one thing to, do the old, the John Boy, the golden days of Depression and all this good stuff, the good old days. Okay, but the truth of the matter is there were flaws and there were evils even in those days. There were ignorance, all right, and those things have to be corrected. If we're going to keep pulp alive and keep the stories fresh and new, we have to take hands out of the sand and say that was wrong, this is what it should have been, and start producing that kind of fiction that addresses those issues dead on, but in a form of entertainment. We don't get up and we don't preach. We write adventure novels, but we write them honestly about real people.
Here, here.
Can I add something? If you really want to see something, a great version of that, Matt Wagner did Sandman Mystery Theater.
Right.
And
Yes.
he did the best pulp going, but he also included the reality of the way African Americans and women were treated, and even in tiny dialogue, I don't want to repeat it because it could offend, but he said things, he had a character who basically said that he had a sister, but she married a black man. And that's all he said, but he showed exactly his colors of the period. In the way, but it didn't take it, he didn't preach the whole story. He showed the negative side of this police officer. That was one of the best things I'd ever seen, and I rarely see that in pulp.
Right. Well, as an editor publisher, when we first got Airship 27 going, a lot of new writers who would come to us, who were, entering the field for the first time ever, one of the questions I kept getting asked all the time was, how authentic do I make this? All right, because of the racism, because of the sexism. How authentic do I make this? And my answer was always, again, the focus is on the story. Okay, you are going to entertain people. You are a writer. Okay. At the same time, though, you have to depict the era as it was, with all its warts. The only thing I ask is that that's not the hero. Okay? I don't care if he's surrounded by bigots. All right? That's awful. That's who they are. But our hero is above that, even in that day, in that time. I'd like to believe Doc Savage was way beyond that. I know Richard Benson was way beyond that. And we go on and on. We're writing heroic fiction. You want to put, stupid, ignorant people in your stories? By all means, do that. But don't make them the hero. They're not the hero. There's nothing heroic about racism and prejudice. Okay? There you go. All right. Go ahead, Rick. How do we, keep new pulp alive and keep it fresh?
One thing that you want to avoid, and I'm going to use an example here of something. There's a genre called Cthulhu Mythos fiction. And it was almost on the verge of dying out in the 80s. Because everybody was writing like Lovecraft wrote. And you got caricatures of Lovecraft writing. Now it's fresh and vibrant because people have gone outside the box and started to bring in things from other sources. So you got strange mythos stories that were written like Vladimir Nabokov. They work. Now, I've had some examples of that, like when Scott Eckert's The Evil in Beverly House, like Doc Savage and Trying to Prejudice, you don't normally think of those together. But there is a danger here. The danger here is, and you've gone through this as an editor, the writer is becoming too literary. He's losing sight of the pulp element. He's beginning, you have to have action in the story.
Right. One of my dear friends, one of my dearest friends who helped me do a Captain Hazard novel was Martin Powell. And Martin is one of the finest writers out there. So I brought him in on board to write Citadel of Fear with him. And we plotted it out and we go back and forth between sections. So it's my turn to send Martin a book, and Martin gets it. And again, Martin is literate. He's gifted, he's bright, he's whatever. So he sends me the next chapter. And I start reading it, and in the middle of the chapter, he starts going into all this motivation. of the character. And it goes on for pages and pages and pages. And I went, whoa! And I called him up and I says, I'm cutting out 4 pages of that section you sent me. And he says, well, why? I said, because nobody got punched. I said, nobody didn't mind. The light bulb went on. I says, I don't want great literature. I don't want Gone with the Wind, okay? I said, this is a pulp. You need to find a way to tell the same thing you did, but while it's happening in the action. And that's the thing I love about pulp. Don't ever get pulp wrong that there's no motivation or characterization. There is. There's plenty of it. But pulp writers knew how to put it in the action.
That's also just good storytelling. That's
Amen.
showing, not telling,
Amen.
right?
Right.
And that actually is literary, right? To
Right.
show it to
The
not
economy of words.
and have expository.
Right.
Yeah.
Get across what you want to say in the fewest number of words. That's what a good writer does.
Lester Ben used to say that the reason he did so good with Doc Savage was he cut out the boring bits, and every time he got boring, he sent a guy in the room with a gun.
Yeah, I don't want to cut you off, but do one final statement because I interrupted you. I apologize.
There's one thing, we're all influenced by comic books, we're all combining elements of comic books, especially crossovers and whatever. You have to remember you're writing Pulp, not comics. And without mentioning any names, sometimes I see writers and I feel like, you know, the Black Bat isn't Batman, but the story reads more like Batman than Black Bat. So just remember, you know, the Spider isn't Spider-Man.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Not mentioning any names.
Yeah. All right, Jim, you're last, though.
I had that problem while I was writing Captain Action, was that, it's a plastic toy, and I wanted to give him some personality, but I was hitting some points where it was like, oh, wait, I gotta do some action here, his name is Captain Action. But, it's like, but I wanted a little bit of who he was in there, so I had to, but as far as what we need to do, and the word that I want to throw out here is experimentation. I think we need to keep experimenting and seeing what can be done. And really the answer to that is everything. Pulp can be adapted to everything, and we're really seeing that now. It's science fiction, and it's westerns, and it's crime, and everything. And that's what I love about it, is I don't think there's anything that we can't do. And just to touch back upon this going towards diversity, it's wonderful what's happening right now, because when the world finally does turn its face and look at us, we're going to be ready. And we're going to show them what we have to offer. And the answer is going to be something for everyone. Honestly, I think there's this sort of little thing going on where some writers are starting to not call themselves pulp writers. And it's sort of disturbed me a little bit, because I don't want to not call myself, a pulp writer. That some feel like there's some sort of stigma attached to that name, or that people will misconstrue what that means. It's going back to education. We need to educate people as to what it is and what it can be, which again is everything. I'm really excited to look for ways of combining things, and Rick was talking about that. I'm working on a concept right now with Pro Se, which is a 60s rock and roll group that's going to run around the world, but they're going to have pulp-style adventures. That wouldn't have happened, back then, but why not now? Why not? And if sometimes we fall down and it's not very well accepted, then we move on to the next thing. But and I think that's where you all come in, is to tell us what sort of things you want to see and what sort of things you want to see us experiment with.
All right. Hey, look, thanks. I really appreciate this. One of the things that I brought up in the first panel I did of this 3 years ago, and I still believe to this day, the reason I absolutely love the new pulp movement is the point you just brought up there, Jim, and that's if you were living in the 1930s and writing the original pulps, you were probably not telling people about this, because you weren't writing for the slicks. All right, less than that we know wanted to write for the slicks. It's just they were not aware of the really phenomenal literature that they were writing. They were not self-aware of that, and that's a shame. And that's a real tragedy, all right? The thing I love about the new pulp movement is that we wear it proud. All right, we put it on our books, we put the label, and we come to these conventions and say, hey, I'm writing new pulp. I'm publishing new pulp. That's a huge change, okay? And then, again, doing the second year of this panel, all right, I found myself in the middle moderating it that year, and it suddenly came to me, and it dawned on me like that shift in time in history, that I remember telling the audience that was like, oh my God, I mean, how unheard of was it, or it was impossible to ever happen that you'd have lived in the mid-1930s and gone to a convention and had Lester Dent sitting there, and Paul Chadwick, and Walter Gibson, and we could have heard these men talk and whatever, and so that what happened was this light bulb went off in my head, and I told the audience, and I'm repeating it here. We're doing that now. These are the pulp writers of our times, all right? And you have the opportunity to sit down and listen to them, and before we wrap this all up, you have the opportunity to question them, to ask them anything you like about anything that we've talked about. We've got 10 minutes before they chase us out of here. Yes?
All right. Now I come to this genre from a different direction. Classical, actually just world mythology and folklore is what I specialized in my studies academically. And so I see the common threads worldwide, which you seem to be interested in, Ron, and also when you proposed that we include the world rather than this early American kind of this peak of American kind of ideal hero, right? And then expand that. So maybe if you research authors like Joseph Campbell or Alan Dundes or some of these others who have explored the cultures of the world, and you can find those common threads in there, perhaps. Maybe you've already found something. I don't know.
Well, I think
it's just something that I'm...
One of the things that older pulp fans know, and this is one of the things that I find that we end up educating new pulp fans with, okay, is that you go to the pulp conventions, and people who are not aware of our community come in and go, oh, well, there were only ever American pulps. Wrong. Buzzer goes off. There were British pulps. There were French pulps. There were German pulps.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is get away from a nationalistic focus.
Right, but that's all I'm saying. We open this up to the world. And it's not unusual for us to want to create characters from different backgrounds and different cultures. And then the field opens up. So what Jim was alluding to as experimenting and making pulp something new again, fresh.
One of the things that I really love doing is seeing the anthology calls for submissions for anthologies. I love to read through those because I can't wait to see what somebody has come up with. And it's like, okay, we want to do mythology. We want to do a whole bunch of pulp stories, and I don't care, pick a god from mythology, and that's what we're going to do. And that's what I just love. It's like, what is somebody going to come up with next? That's the anticipation of that is great as far as I'm concerned.
Oh. Any other, please? Yes.
What do you think about the young adult and the new adult market? I mean, obviously, with the whole Harry Potter explosion, there's a whole new generation of people who are actually reading books again out there. Do you think that's something that the new pulp movement can incorporate? Can do a young adult book or something like that? Do you think that's something that would be interesting to you?
Let me, and I'll let you jump in because that plays to several of our colleagues are actually librarians. All right, there's a gentleman in South Carolina named Roman Leary who's going to write for us, who is the head librarian in his hometown. Barry Reese, one of the premier writers of New Pulp, is a librarian in Atlanta. Roman Leary was the guy who, out of the blue, sends me an email one day and says, I just wanted to let you know I picked up all your Captain Hazard novels, and I am putting them in the young adult section of our library. Because, honest to God, most young adult books today are geared to girls. And there's nothing I can point teenage boys to. I discovered your Captain, and we know a lot of the early pulps were really geared to young American, males. So suddenly, that can be tapped, and please pick up on it.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, it's a brilliant sort of marketing and categorization ploy that they already exist, to your point, right?
Right.
Let's just make sure that we're informing people about them. And then there are a couple of people out there who are actually sort of consciously doing that. So I think there's a gent named Tim Bird, I think, is doing Doc Wild and the Frogs
Oh,
of Doom.
God, yes, right, yeah.
And that's absolutely squarely aimed at the young adult market.
Right, that's like Doc with a family.
Right.
And it's right at the whole young adult audience. But we need more of it. Trust me, we do need a lot more of that.
I want to go even younger. I have a outline for an intermediates level pulp story that I hope turns into a series that I want to write next year. So let's go as far as that. And then I can't think of the name of it. I'm sorry, is even younger, isn't it? Or the one we did the kids pulp.
Oh, we finally did a kid's book, a children's book. Barry Baskerville solves a case.
What age group is that?
That's basically 7 and 8 year old.
There you go.
All right, and that comes from us, from a professor at the University in New York named Richard Kellogg, who is the biggest Sherlock Holmes fan in the world. And he gets a hold of us because he sees all the new pulp stuff we're doing. He goes, "Would you be interested in a children's book?" He said, "I'd love to write something that would introduce 7 and 8 year olds to Sherlock Holmes." Oh, bring it on. He gives me this great story we found in Illustrated, Gary Cotto, and we put out our first children's book, Barry Baskerville Solves the Case, and it's selling like hotcakes. It's absolutely doing great guns. So we do have to broaden our own market, and I think the young adult is a great place for new pulp to be explored, all right? Look, we've got like 5 minutes left before the next panel comes in, and I always want to end this with giving our illustrious panel an opportunity to promote what they're doing right now or what's out there. So what do you got out there?
We just released here at the Pulpest and FarmerCon The Scarlet Jaguar, which is about Pat Wildman, the daughter of Doc Wildman. So again, as I mentioned, I very much enjoy actually writing female heroic characters. And then forthcoming in that same vein, I've got Honey West and T.H.E. Cat in A Girl and Her Cat.
All right.
I just submitted to Analog, the magazine company, a pulp style story about a early 60s rockabilly musician who gets involved in a sci-fi 60s stuff. Very unique and very different from something I've ever read. Thank you. I just got tired, honestly, of the occult stuff out there. I had to try something new. I'm working on a novella for Ron for my third Secret Agent X, and he just asked me to get involved in writing a 1700 story using Hawkeye from the Leatherstocking Tales and Last of the Mohegans, and I accepted immediately. So that's what I'm up to.
Right.
By next week, Black Coat Press will publish my Shadows of the Opera Retribution on Love. And in October, there will be Sisters of the Shadow, the Cagliostro Curse, which is in the same universe, only about a couple of years later, or a couple of decades later.
It's all sequels for me. Now that I'm like running through my mental list of things, I'm getting close to finishing up Sergeant Janus Returns, and I'm several chapters into Captain Action Book 2, the untitled Captain Action Book 2 at this moment, and then going into Monster Earth 2, which is actually called Monster Earth Betrayal, and Monster Aces 2. I'm trying to think if there's something that. Coming out that's I'm in the Weekly book also. I'm very proud. I'm so glad that Frank accepted that. That's great. And I just want to quick plug my my reading at 3 o'clock. I think is in this
Right. So
please somebody come to this reading.
Well, please come to the Airship 27 tables after the panel.
Right after this,
We'll be
yeah.
autographing
Yeah. And then I'm coming back here.
And we've got a sale going on in Captain Action book for this show particularly. So please come on by. And
If you come to the reading, I promise that diversity. If you like ghosts, spies, superheroes, giant monsters, you're going to hear all of that. And it's my first reading, so I need somebody out there.
And my own personal newest work is here, which I just found out thanks to Rich Harvey. Rich is manning the Moonstone table here at the con, and the latest Spider anthology was just released. It's called Spider Extreme Prejudice, and I have a story in it called Spider Trap. It's my second story from Moonstone. Please check it out. I'm currently working on a G8 and Battle Aces novella for Moonstone, which I hope to have done by the end of the year, and tons of other stuff. But hey, you've been a great audience. Thanks so much for coming.